Hey everyone, it's Types, and ACE SPEC cards are really important in the Pokemon TCG, as they are pretty clearly the strongest cards in the game, ignoring the fact that they're ACE SPECs. So, for example, one of the strongest cards in the game that's not an ACE SPEC is the supporter card Boss's Orders, which is a gusting effect. So you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active. It's in most decks in the game, and it's good. It's played as one of, two of, three of, something like that in almost every deck in the game, and is quite good. And then you have the ACE SPEC, which is the best ACE SPEC by a notable margin, which is Prime Catcher, which is an item card, except it's a gust as well. So you switch one of your opponent's bench to the active, and then if you do, you also switch your Pokemon. The switch for your Pokemon is kind of good. It's not like absolutely insane, and it's not the reason this card is good, obviously. The reason it's good is for that gust. But essentially, it's a supporter card level card, except it's on an item card, except of course it's an ACE SPEC, which means you can only play one copy of any ACE SPEC in your entire deck. Originally, I made a YouTube post about Radiant Pokemon and Pokemon you like to see nerfed into Radiant Pokemon, which have the same rule that you can only have one Radiant Pokemon in your deck. But I decided it would be really interesting if they were ACE SPECs instead. So we're going to take a look at today 6 cards. Actually, I have one honorable mention, but I'm being to look at 5 cards that could be really interesting if they were, instead of their regular cards, they were ACE SPEC cards, in my opinion. These are 5 or 6 of the most played cards in the game, and they are all basics as well. And this is interesting because if you're not familiar with the ACE SPEC mechanic, I mean, I explained the general idea. You can have one ACE SPEC in your deck, and these cards are really strong. However, they originally started out exclusively as items in the black and white era. However, it got pretty complicated, I guess, I imagine, in their design process when the item cards were now no longer item cards and were actually tool cards. So now, looking back at them, the original ones are actually, some of them are items and some of them are tools, which again were originally items, but now looking, if you're playing with them in expanded format, they're not actually items anymore. So now there are 2 types of trainers, and decided to extend it to the third type of trainer that's not supporter, which is the stadium category. So you have is there actually just no? Yeah, there's 2. There's Grand Tree and Neutralization Zone, which are pretty strong cards, by the way. Kind of long text on both of them, especially Grand Tree, which is not that complicated but super long. And then you have Special Energies as well, which they decided to add. And that means there's a big hole. Well, there's a bit of a hole with supporter cards. There aren't supporter ACE SPECs. The reason there aren't is because ACE SPECs are naturally strong cards. Supporters are naturally stronger than items as well. So you'd have some crazy powerful cards that are also kind of hard to search out. And, items are searchable. Tools are searchable. Stadiums are searchable. They're not all easily searchable. Supporters are a little harder to search, and obviously if you're searching for them using a supporter, then you're not going to be able to play a supporter on that turn, the card that you just got. So ultimately, I think the game would work if there were a supporter ACE SPECs, but there aren't. But that's not what I'm going over today. I'm going over Pokemon cards that are Pokemon that I think would make sense as ACE SPECs because they'd be better balanced in that manner, essentially nerfing them and also changing some game dynamics because, as I said, Prime Catcher is by far the best ACE SPEC in the game. There are a bunch of solid ACE SPECs, though. Notably, Unfair Stamp is pretty strong. Where is it? Here it is. Has a pretty nasty disruptive ACE SPEC, but it's not. It's really strong when you use it, but you can't use it all the time. Then you also have I think Sparkling Crystal is still really good. I think it's good in Dragapult. I still stand by that. I know there are a lot of fans of Precious Trolley out there. Brilliant Blender and Energy Search Pro are pretty situational, but in certain decks, they're absolutely insane. And there's some other pretty solid ones as well. I will say Grand Tree is also a pretty cool ACE SPEC, which can be really strong in some decks. And Secret Box, that's pretty versatile and strong. But ultimately, deciding what ACE SPEC you want to put in your deck often isn't that interesting. So I thought if you applied it to Pokemon, it becomes more interesting. And you'll see what I mean as I hop in. The first card I have here, also I made these myself visually, so they look okay. They don't look great. I had to move the ACE SPEC stuff sideways so it doesn't cover up the text, but it still encroaches a little more than I'd like. But regardless, here it is. And we have Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX. Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX is the honorable mention here. Shout out to Uncommon Fossil, who I talked to a little bit in making this video. And this card is the one that ended up getting cut. I had 5, and I decided to drop this one. Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX is a really strong Pokemon. It's tied for the second highest HP on a basic EX Pokemon, so very tanky there. Of course, has its ability, which helps its attack cost less. Normally it's 5, I guess, being the game is 5, but then as the game goes on, it gets cheaper. Eventually, it's free or like costing 1, and it's 240, and it's really strong. This card is a very strong card that also sees a lot of play. Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX is, I don't think it's ever a build around card. I'm not sure. There might be some decks that build around it, but they're like super niche. So ultimately, it's played in a lot of different decks. It's a very strong card as a finishing Pokemon within decks. Ultimately, I think it could be cool filling up the ACE SPEC slot in decks. If you look at like Marnie's Grimmsnarl, this list played it and it came second at the Japanese Championship, a pretty major tournament that happened quite recently. And Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX would be, it would be quite strong in this deck, but you might not play it if you want to play another Ace Spec Pokemon or Ace Spec Trainer, as we'll talk, or NG, I guess. But ultimately, I think, it's not necessarily super insanely strong. It's quite strong when you use it. It's probably like the best stats attacker in the game when it's like, if it's free, 240 damage, 260 HP, that's just kind of broken. But obviously, most of the game, it's not doing that. And a lot of the other cards we're going to talk about are early game Pokemon that either have really strong utility or are just like super game defining, and also are a little more annoying. I don't think Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX is super annoying. I don't know if all these cards on this list are super annoying either. There are some that are very annoying that I've heard people say should be banned or potentially banned. I haven't heard that of Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX. It is very strong, though. I want to mention it. I said it's an honorable mention, but it's not that far out of the realm of like in the same category as these other ones. Also, obviously, this video isn't super serious. Should Pokemon actually? I mean, they obviously shouldn't errata these cards into Ace Specs, but these are really strong cards that could use nerfs. So if they had originally printed them as Ace Specs, that could be cool. And as I said, I think Ace Spec Pokemon could be cool in the game as well, causing an interesting decision because we had Radiant Pokemon, which are essentially just Ace Spec Pokemon, except for the fact that they're competing with other Pokemon. Competing between Pokemon and trainers is really interesting. A bit hard to balance, I'm not going to lie, but it could be cool. A bit of a design challenge, so as I said. The next card we have here, though, the first actual card is Munkidori. Side note, this looks kind of ugly, I'm not going to lie. With the pink and the purple, it's like kind of weird. But regardless, Munkidori is a card, I believe it's currently the most played card in the game by one metric. There's two ways to measure it. It's the most played if you're weighting it based on the copies in the list. I was playing earlier, and this kind of inspired me to make this. I was playing Ace's lower deck that had relatively low damage, and my opponent, turn 1, went first or second. I don't remember if they went first or second, but they got 4 Munkidoris on their bench plus their attacker, and I didn't knock out their attacker, and then they got all these Munkidoris, and I was like, this is like annoying. Munkidori, in my opinion, I still stand by the fact that I don't think it's like super broken. I don't think it's the best card in the game, or the best Pokemon. Certainly not the best card. I don't think it's the best Pokemon either. I think it's probably, I might be in the top 10. I could honestly see it not in the top 10 at all, to be honest. But regardless, Munkidori is still a strong card, and it's a really highly played card. It ultimately ends up with some interesting scenarios. I talked about Radiant Pokemon and how they're like this. Munkidori, as I said, is played a lot. It is also played in higher quantities. Notably, Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX is playing it in pretty high quantities. Gardevoir is playing it in pretty high quantities as well. How many are in this list? This one plays 3. Something like Dragapult is playing it relatively commonly as like a 1 of, maybe a 2 of. And you can see in other decks as well, Goldingo commonly plays it. And honestly, it doesn't slot super easily into these decks. You need to kind of make room for it, but it is pretty strong. A deck like Enzoric EX can make good use of it. And ultimately, it finds itself in a lot of decks, but ultimately, in my opinion, ends up with somewhat silly scenarios where just bouncing damage back and forth between opponents, which is kind of cool. Moving damage is really fun. One of my favorite Radiant Pokemon, if not my favorite Radiant Pokemon, in terms of card design, is Radiant Alakazam, which has some really interesting aspects to it. Notably, its ability is obviously pretty similar, the closer thing to Munkidori, which does moves 2 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another of their Pokemon. It doesn't have the healing aspect of Munkidori. However, it is moving damage around and was okay. It was not as strong as Munkidori is. Oh, this is more play than I thought, but certainly not as strong as Munkidori, especially because it is a Radiant, and Radiant Greninja, by the way, is like by far the strongest Radiant. Radiants were kind of badly balanced, but Munkidori is cool with moving damage counters around. Abilities that do damage are essentially always really fun, in my opinion, unless they're like completely broken, like Dusclops and Expanded, which just like completely broke the format and led to a ban. But outside of that, I think they're pretty much always fun. Iron Valiant EX, things like that. And Munkidori is cool, but it's played like so much, and it creates, it adds time to the game that isn't necessarily adding too much to it. So I think less Munkidori in the game could be cool, and it helps certain single prize or just single prize in general. It makes them better because single prize areas obviously do. The idea is to have more turns, and then your opponent's going to get more Munkidori value for the increased amount of turns. So that's not great. And ultimately, just less Munkidori I think could be good for the game. However, it is a cool card to have. It is really good in some decks, like Gardevoir. It's insane, and you'd really have to play Munkidori. I imagine you'd be playing Munkidori as your ACE spec. We'll talk about some of these other cards as well. But I think it still would make the cut. I think it is a card that if it was nerfed to an ACE spec, it would still be playable, but situational, right? And there's a lot of ACE specs. Ultimately, I don't know if the game actually it probably doesn't need more ACE specs. There's a lot of them, and like half of them like don't really see any play. But I don't think there's a single ACE spec that's truly abysmal either. I think there's a reason to play any of the ACE specs, even if it's pretty situational. I guess Treasure Tracker, I've never seen anyone play. It's like in some really niche tool stuff. Like someone played in Raging Bull. What is this? Okay, not sure why this is here. It seems kind of silly, but regardless, most of them are like okay, but kind of situational. I think Munkidori might end up being a little weak as an ACE spec. You could obviously buff these if you want to a little bit. I heard some people talk about them when I posted about it. Someone mentioned Dusclops. A few people actually did and said like make it like I think someone said make it basic. There's some kind of bad stuff that can come out of that. As I said, Dusclops was broken and expanded. Need to kind of like shift some things around. But regardless, Munkidori could really be a card that I think is a really fun Pokemon. Right now, I don't think it's like kind of fun. As I said, it's a cool ability, but it's played so much and when played card gets like played so much. Something like Dragapult EX, which I also considered for this, but wanted to make them all basics, and also Dragapult isn't like super broken. It's just very strong. Not that Munkidori is necessarily better than Dragapult, but regardless, Munkidori has played more than Dragapult, definitely. And it's a card that I think if it was played a little less, it would actually be a little more fun, a little more unique. And also with Radiant Alakazam, this has a solid attack. Munkidori's attack is also okay. It's not like that good. It's not used very much. It's kind of annoying when you use it, and it's kind of fun. As well, kind of annoying, as I said, because I don't like coin flips, but it is unique and interesting there. I do want to point that out. But regardless, Munkidori, a pretty interesting card here that I'm honestly a little sick of seeing, but it is a fun card. And I feel like this could make it feel more fun. Next card we have here is the other most played card in the game. If you go by unweighted, so if you count, if a card is just played as a 1 of, that's weighted as much as it's played as a 4 of, which, there's reasons to favor one over the other. And so regardless, Fezandipiti EX is the most played card in the game, or Munkidori, one of those two. And Fezandipiti EX I also think is better than Munkidori. I do think Fezandipiti EX is the best Pokemon in the game. It's a 1 of in almost every deck in the game, and it's a card that says once during a turn, if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, you may draw 3. But you can only use one of this ability per turn, which kind of makes it already a kind of like a Prism Star, which is like a 1 of in a deck. You can't really play more than one Fezandipiti EX. I don't know if I've really seen that in lists. It is a very strong card, and so you could, honestly, it's not like that bad. You almost always want it in play, but it's not that hard to find. It's not a huge liability on the bench either, and has a solid attack. It's just kind of crazy. Ultimately, this card's really good, really cool, and honestly kind of annoying as well because, and I've heard people say that this card should be banned. I don't agree with that, but if it was weaker, I certainly would not, I feel like it could honestly be draw 2 cards in standard and still be very good, or be nerfed in a number of ways. I've heard a lot of people suggest lowering the HP, which would be potentially cool for it as well, for balancing purposes, if that's how it was originally printed. But regardless, this is another idea, and I think Fezandipiti EX would still be played a ton if it was changed in this way. But obviously change the game, and if you are playing Fezandipiti, it's a card that allows you to have a more consistent draw engine. I'd say Fezandipiti EX, it's not really a full draw engine Pokemon, but in terms of the draw Pokemon in the game, I think it's by far the best. Because it's consistent draw throughout the course of the game when you need it. If you're not being knocked out, then presumably you're in an okay position and you don't need it as much. Ultimately, I don't really need to dive too much into why Fezandipiti EX is strong, though. I feel like pretty much everyone knows that it's like super strong. But regardless, this is a card that is going to be drawing you a bunch of cards and is annoying again to play against, which is why restricting it some is good because if you Iona your opponent, you want to be able to not necessarily guarantee that they don't have what they need, but like you want to Iona them to a small hand to make sure they don't have a lot of cards to work with. And if you Iona them to 2, then they draw their card and then they Fezandipiti. Now you've Iona them and they have 6 cards and it's the end of the game and Iona's not doing its job. And so that's kind of annoying, right? Iono, I guess. I mean, it's annoying on both sides. Getting Iona is annoying, and so I don't mind Fezandipiti in the game, but it, lowers the value of a disruptive supporter like that. And also something like Unfair Stamp, lots of different things like this are weaker because of Fezandipiti EX. You can target Fezandipiti EX, and that becomes a very common thing in certain situations because it's just such a powerful draw card on the board. And again, is that like Pokemon that you're kind of looking at? And also Pokemon that are ACE SPECs are recoverable, so it's not like if you lose this, it's the end of the world or anything. And it's not like Munkidori where you need an energy either. Fezandipiti, you can just Night Stretcher and draw 3 cards, and that's really good. Adds extra value to Night Stretcher. I mean, it's a really, really good card, but you're playing it, and it's like kind of cool there. Ultimately, I think Fezandipiti EX as an ACE spec would actually be the coolest. Of any of the cards on here, maybe the next one as well. But I think this card, it's a really cool card. But if it had a little more thought to it, because like right now it's like, yeah, I'll put it in every deck essentially. It's not actually in every deck because there are some decks that have strong enough draw engines without it. And there are also decks that just like don't. I mean, Marnie's Kim Shelly doesn't play it. It gets damaged a bunch and stuff. Honestly, I don't think it's that bad in the deck, but regardless, it's not played in that deck. I'm not a big fan of Marnie's, though. I'm not the best person to analyze Marnie's, but regardless, this card certainly sees play. I think, as I said, I mean, it's the most played Pokemon in the game, or it's in the most number of decks in the game. So it's a really strong card, and I think it would be a little more interesting with a nerf. The next card we have here, though, is the card that I think has been called for bans the most in the game, which is Budew. Budew is the strongest single prize Pokemon in the game, maybe. I'm not really sure, to be honest. It's a really weird card to analyze because obviously it my allergies are bothering me. Obviously, it's a card that has low HP, low damage, low attack cost, low retreat, free attack cost, and really nasty to deal with effectiveness attack as well, which is kind of annoying. It's very annoying. I know a lot of people who really despise this card. I know people who like this card, and I think putting it as an ACE spec puts it in that good middle ground to make it a card that you can use sometimes to. Oh, I just realized I said I had allergies with Budew, and that's not a pun. It's true. It's true, unfortunately. But regardless, yeah, Budew is a card that with his itchy pollen attack. I mean, it's supposed to be annoying, and it is. And I'm not really a big fan of item lock or really any foreign lock. I think it can be interesting, and I think it can be strong, obviously, as well. Like I think Iron Thorns is pretty solid in standard. The random thing. Also, I was playing it. It's not insane, but it's all right. But Budew, Iron Thorns, these different types of lock Pokemon are really annoying to have to deal with. And Budew is naturally a one of in dex, so it's in low counts. You're probably attacking with it once. You could attack with it multiple times, and it is a pivot, but also it has really low HP. So having it in play has value, but obviously, there's a lot of things to consider with this card. And its balance is okay. I'm not going to sit here and say it's like some super overpowered card, but it is very strong. Definitely a little overtuned. Obviously, the strongest of the baby Pokemon by far. Cleffa is in second. It's pretty clearly in second, and it's like not played very much. It's okay. It's a cool card, but Budew is played so much, and it also creates kind of boring situations where not much is happening. I think that's okay, and that's what some people like, but it's not what everyone likes. And ultimately, reducing it and making it you have to choose between Budew and some other really strong card, I think fits pretty nicely. I'm actually interested in hearing down below in the comments if you think this would be a good way to fix Budew. Kind of in like theoretically, obviously it's like kind of weird and kind of clunky if it actually happened. Obviously not like something I actually want to see. I mean, just them randomly eroding cards is not good. But ultimately, I think it is a change that if they had originally done this, that would be cool. But I'm interested, of course, hearing all your thoughts on all these cards in the comments and other suggestions as well. But yeah, Budew definitely as an ace spec, I think could be a really good fit. The next one I have here is another really highly played card, which is really strong, and it's the Latios EX. Latios EX gives all your basic Pokemon to play free retreat. Latios EX is another kind of no-brainer card, kind of like Fezandipiti EX, to be honest, where you just put it in every all-basic deck. Realistically, I mean, you don't have to put it in there. But it's very good, right? So something like Raging Bolt or Joltik Box or I don't know. There's different decks, right? Some of these are evolution decks as well, but it's really good in lots of decks. Oh, our Caledon's really good. That's not just basics, but you have high HP or high retreat basics. It's really strong in those decks, and also it's not a liability on the bench. Really, it's kind of a liability, a little more than Fezandipiti, but it has the same HP, so it's not that bad to leave on the bench. And of course, it's not going to get trapped. So ultimately, this card you just kind of put in all different decks. And also invalidates boss trapping to slow down the game, which I think is a cool part of the game, which I kind of like. I understand why it's annoying to get trapped by, but it removes something from the game, which I think is kind of fun. I'm a bigger fan of something like Pekka EX. Pekka EX switches, which one makes it a little stronger than this, so that you're not stuck by um, retreat locking Pokemon, which is like makes it better, but ultimately not super meaningful, right? Retreat locking is not very common in the Pokemon TCG and standard right now. It does happen sometimes. If you know me, you know I'm a big fan of Feraligatr, and Feraligatr is a classic retreat locking Pokemon. But Latios, and Latios does not protect against that. But ultimately, Latias helps you in almost every situation where Pekka would help you in for almost every deck. And, well, for the decks they're playing it, there aren't that many decks that would play Pekka anyways. And so it's really good there. And also, Pekka has the downside of one is kind of weak. It also has a cooler attack, I will say, but it's a weaker Pokemon, and also it's a Pokemon that poisons you, right? It makes you weaker, so it has a downside. I feel like this card needs a bit of a nerf. I don't think it's crazy broken, but I think it's pretty strong. I'm pretty sure it's the strongest card from Surging Sparks, unless I'm forgetting something. I'm pretty sure I definitely had it as the top Pokemon out of the set. Any good trainers here? I mean, there's some like fine enough cards here, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's by far the strongest card from Surging Sparks. A mediocre set, some really solid cards in it, but nothing like super crazy. Regardless, this is not a Surging Sparks analysis, but Latios EX is a really strong card, and a bit of a no-brainer card, which I think if you had to make a bit more thought about it, it would be cool. I think you would end up seeing some play because it is really strong in some decks and just solid in some decks as well, but also smooths things out in a really nice way and opens up some options for Pokemon to send up in the active to get use out of their abilities or something, though that's not a big part of the game right now, but I think it is still pretty cool. Last card I have here, though, is Squawkabilly EX with its really powerful ability Squawk and Seize. This card can only be used on one turn of the game, but it is really strong, allowing you to discard your hand and draw 6 cards. This is the one that was suggested to me by Uncommon Fossil to add in, and I was also thinking of, but it's a card that is very strong and played in a good chunk of decks to create really explosive turns, explosive setups, and explosive turn when it attacks as well. And that's really cool, I will say. I do like really powerful draw cards. That's just something I like. I like big combos and big, like, crazy things. I like Dedenne GX. Dedenne GX is definitely kind of broken. I like Shaman EX. That's definitely even more broken. I mean, it's banned. I kind of actually wish it was unbanned, but it is very broken. And yeah, there's a bunch of cards that are just kind of broken. Squawkabilly EX is toned down, but it's a strong draw card. The reason why I'm hesitant to put it here is because it is only usable on one card, and having a card that's a one of hurting your deck in other ways because you can't play other cards, and also being a one of is a bit of an issue, but I think it's not that big of an issue. Squawkabilly is such a powerful draw Pokemon. Also it's a bit of a liability because its HP is like really low for a 2-prizer, but it has a usable attack that's actually kind of important sometimes, and then also a lower retreat cost than. Actually, no. I was going to say it's lower than retreat cost. I guess it's lower than Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX and technically lower than Latios EX, but obviously you got the ability there. Regardless, Squawkabilly EX is a Pokemon that has really a really good draw, right? So it's a strong card, and I think restricting this card could be good. If Squawkabilly EX plus Fezandipiti EX is an edge and you see some, and it's honestly I don't know. It's like not super fun in my opinion. I think more traditional engines would make the game a little more fun. Traditional engine being something that's like an every turn draw ability, potentially something like Knocked Out as well. But these like evolution-based draw engines that are drawing you cards throughout the course of the game as opposed to burst draw at specific points where it's really necessary in the setup phase and throughout the game when you're trying to dig for specific resources to get certain knockouts in the mid to late game. So ultimately, I think separating those two, making it so you couldn't play both, could be fun. And then you could still play one and have some other like mediocre draw card. I was also going to consider BWX for this. BWX just isn't quite strong enough in my opinion, but it is a really cool card. But I think it would just kind of get pushed out of the game at that point. But regardless, Squawkabilly is definitely a card that is very strong and leads to some pretty explosive things. Also, long turn ones, like it just like doubles length of the first turn or something like that, which is okay, but not always what you're looking for. Maybe some longer turns throughout the course of the game, but a shorter first turn could be more fun. And Squawkabilly removing that could be cool, and then also smooth out decks so that you're not always playing this, and then if you're not playing it, you miss a turn one, that's fine. If you are playing it and you miss a turn one, then that's kind of your choice, I guess, or unlucky. I don't really know what to say about that one. But overall, I think the Pokemon TCG I honestly could see them bringing a spec Pokemon or Radiant Pokemon back, or some mechanic like this. I'm not super sure that they're going to bring it back super soon, but I could definitely see it happening. But tell me down below in the comments what your thoughts are on this concept. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you leave a like if you did. Make sure you subscribe as well. And of course, comment down below your thoughts. But I hope you enjoyed. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.